Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, March 8th, 2024, and today we are going to be taking a look at the Fox News Power Rankings. They just released 2 days ago their 2024 Electoral College map, and their high-level takeaway here is that Donald Trump leads what they determine to be a dissatisfied electorate. But is that really the case? Well, we're going to take a look at the electoral map and dive a little bit deeper into the Fox News math and science behind their ratings and why they have these states leaning in one direction or the other, and generally getting a vibe check from one of the more right-leaning news sources that probably would be more inclined to give Donald Trump the advantage, but we will come and see this on the map. Now, looking at the Fox News Power Rankings, historically Fox News has actually aligned largely with many of my own personal predictions. And I think that is because of the fact that the Fox News Election Decision Desk doesn't necessarily have its own internal biases, at least not ones that seem to be very obvious. And I think Fox News also really likes to get things correct. When it comes down to electoral calls or pre-election calls, they don't want to be seeming too biased, or honestly speaking, they just want to be right. At the end of the day, Fox News is a reputable news source when it comes down to polling and when it comes down to electoral college calls. They really haven't been wrong in past presidential elections going back, I think, maybe to the year 2000, and that's a good place to be. And that probably means they don't want to be too far off when it comes down to their own internal rankings, at least for the sake of validity. And so what we're going to take a look at is the forecast that they have provided us with Donald Trump being 251 electoral votes, Joe Biden being at 241 electoral votes, with 270 needed to win. That puts Donald Trump exactly 19 off, and Joe Biden 29 off. And so both of them are very, very close when it comes down to the forecast. But the reason why they call this a dissatisfied or a depressed electorate, depending on the graphic they're using, it shows here that 72% of voters are just simply dissatisfied with how things are going. And while that is up for interpretation, and you can take that how you must, 72% regardless is a bad place to be for both sides of the aisle. 6 in 10 viewed that both Biden and Trump unfavorably, and 18% support a named third-party candidate if that was their choice on the ballot. And so it looks like this electorate isn't super excited about this election. And so Fox News takes this into account and came forth with this 2024 prediction map. Now, the colors here are ones that you are probably used to, but to make this a little bit easier, we're going to take a break from the Fox News website and move over to YAPMS. This is a website, YAPMS.com, that is phenomenal for election predictions, and so I decided to translate their electoral college ratings in the states and districts to this map so it would be a little bit more uniform and understandable if you've been watching my videos with the electoral college map. And so again, 251 for Trump, 241 for Biden here, 46 toss-up electoral college votes. What I'm actually going to do here, make this color a little bit more white because I think it'd be a little bit more obvious that way, but 46 electoral votes that are genuinely up in the air. We don't have an idea as to who's going to be winning Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Nevada, and Arizona beyond a few, weirdly surface level predictions when it comes down to just brushing the map here. I mean, we don't have much data out of the states enough to say that we are definitively going to have Biden win Pennsylvania, definitively going to have Trump win Arizona. I mean, a lot of the times and a lot of what we do when it comes down to early predictions, and what I think Fox News is doing here, is taking into account fundraising data, past election data, and current polling data. But as we get closer and closer to the election, when early vote numbers start going in, when enthusiasm rates start being calculated, when ads are being spent by both sides of the aisle in the tens of millions in these states, that's the data that really helps us center around the election, which is why more often than not, these early predictions aren't beautiful indicators of how the election will actually end up. But there are some reasons to believe that there is, credibility behind them. And sometimes they guide the way campaigns approach this election, and campaigns have approached last elections. For instance, if the political pundits agreed that the state of Ohio, like they do in Fox News, like they do on CNN, like they do in the Cook Political Report, like they do in many other predictions, that Ohio is a state that Trump will probably win, and Fox News has as safe read, but probably going to win there, the Biden campaign will look at that and say, maybe this isn't a state worth investing in. And so they use that tens of millions of dollars that they did spend in Ohio in 2020, I kid you not, did spend in Ohio for Trump to win by 8 points, and say, maybe we'll spend that in a state like Nevada or a state like Arizona. And there's reason to believe that they approach this in the same way we do, from this high level point of taking in the data and making their own prediction based on the other predictions and understanding it and diving deeper into it and analyzing it. And so I think, you're going to see some similar comments made, I think, if you're looking at it from the inside of the campaign versus on the outside of a campaign. And that's because everybody has one common goal, and that is victory. But looking at our electoral map here, I think that Fox News provides us with some pretty easy calls in some of these states that maybe weren't easy to call in 2020 or even 2016. They easily characterize states like Ohio as a safe red state, a state that might have been more competitive in 16, then ended up not being, and then they thought it would be in 2020. They're just calling it straight off the bat that Trump is absolutely winning here. Now, I don't agree that Iowa should be less red than Ohio. In fact, I think you should see these probably flipped, but both of them are going to go to Trump. I have no doubt in my mind that President Trump wins both of these, honestly speaking, not really battleground states, but more competitive than safe states. But the victor isn't really going to change. Trump is going to win Ohio. Trump is going to win Iowa. And so I agree that Iowa and Ohio vote in the right direction, in the, literally the right word direction for Donald Trump. But I don't agree that the rating should be different. But it gives us a general sense of what Fox News is thinking. That Texas is also going to be a state that Donald Trump easily wins. I agree with the notion that this is a state Donald Trump wins, but easily I think comes a little bit more to me in Ohio and Iowa than it does in Texas, but the characterization I think is entirely fair. Now, Democrats, of course, have their own section of safe and likely states. Colorado and New Mexico, straight off the bat, are what they determine to be solid Biden states. They don't think that Trump has any chance of winning in those states. Do I? No. I mean, Biden probably won't win them by the same margin he does in states like California and New York, which is the big reason why I don't like that these states share a characterization. A percentage is one thing, a margin is another, and often, margins do show the strength of an election. But Colorado and New Mexico, I think, are states that Biden is going to win. And so you have these two states that were swing states in 2020, swing states in 2016 that are locked in for Biden. That puts him in a pretty good position. Now, moving over to the likely states, you actually have some surprises on this map, New Hampshire and the state of Virginia. To me, I look at them and say, these are two states that maybe would have been more competitive in a better year for Donald Trump. I mean, looking at where we are when it comes down to 2024 data, I honestly think that more people would be expecting them to be closer than likely blue. But I agree that they are likely blue. Fox News, surprisingly enough, I think, has aligned heavily with me when it comes down to my electoral ratings. And so New Hampshire and Virginia are likely blue states, and I think a lot of people are starting to recognize that. Besides the 2021 victory of Glenn Youngkin and Republicans winning back of the House delegates only to lose it 2 years later, isn't enough of an indicator that Virginia is somehow this massive swing state that's returning back to where it was prior to 2016. I mean, Virginia has been close and has certainly had close elections. But to me, I'm not looking at this and saying that Virginia is now going to be a toss-up state and that Biden might lose Virginia. I reject that notion. But looking at it, Virginia is a likely blue state. New Hampshire, also likely blue. I do agree with those characterizations. Another two likely blue states and districts that they characterize are Nebraska's 2nd District and Maine at Large. Maine at Large, I think you often see just really brushed over by mainstream punditry because they don't think too heavily about that state. But it's not a safe blue state. There's a huge 2nd District here that actually leans red. I don't know why I forgot to, switch those characterizations there, but Maine's 1st is safe blue, Maine's 2nd is likely red, and you're going to find that it narrows down the entire state to roughly, a likely margin for President Biden. But again, that makes sense. Nebraska's 2nd District is a district that the Republicans have tried to gerrymander to be more Republican. Nebraska and Maine are very interesting in that they do actually, flip their districts, allowing them to vote for a candidate different than the rest of the state. And both of them took an advantage of that back in 2020, and so roughly equalize each other out. But Nebraska's 2nd District is a district that Republicans tried to gerrymander and make more conservative in 2024, only for the suburban area there really to shift further away from Republicans. And so it's quite interesting if you ask me. Omaha region, bigger city in Nebraska, but Democrats are on track to win there. But now moving out of the likely states, Florida, Texas, Iowa, Virginia, New Hampshire, we are down to these states that are in the lean column, meaning that the confidence level there is a little bit less, but we still have an expectation that these candidates win them should the election be held today. And now, honestly, I'm at a bit of a shocking point when I see a state like Michigan on the lean blue column. I do believe that if the election was held today, President Biden would do better in Michigan than expected. But to come out and say that this state is going to be lean blue while you have states like Pennsylvania as toss-ups doesn't fully make sense to me. I think they come together, These three states have voted in unison since the 1988 presidential election, and I don't really see 2024 being tremendously different, at least not in the way that Michigan is going to be lean blue, but Pennsylvania and Wisconsin are toss-ups. And based on where we are when it comes down to polling data, the state of Pennsylvania is better for Biden than Michigan. That's a fact. Wisconsin is better for Biden than Michigan. But I do understand the reason to believe that Michigan would in fact be more competitive, or would in fact be more safe blue, but not enough to say that it is in fact safe blue. But they aren't saying that. And so when I take a look at this map and take a look at this rating, I think a lot of it is motivated by Michigan's strong performance for Gretchen Whitmer, strong performance for Democrats up across the ballot in 2022. But I will caution it in saying that President Biden does have a specific weakness when it comes down to the Arab American community in the Dearborn region, in the Detroit region of the state, that has always been very strong for Democrats in the presidential election. Democrats have always relied on these people for victory. And so looking at a huge amount of an uncommitted vote coming from that part of the state, a lack of enthusiasm when it comes down to the general election matchup, Michigan, I think, strikes me as a little bit surprising that it's lean blue while its counterparts like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania are not. But honestly, enough about the Rust Belt. We can move on from that. I think you know where I stand on those ratings, but it makes sense. It's just not perfect, right? But let's move on to other parts of the country. States that are also important, like North Carolina and Georgia and Arizona and Nevada. I honestly agree with some of these characterizations. Now, I do think Georgia is a state that Democrats probably aren't winning on the presidential, but I don't think that this state is at all gone for future elections. In fact, none of these really are. President Biden's performance in 2024 will likely be dictated by the current circumstances surrounding the economy, the war in the Middle East, what's happening here when it pertains to the border. And I think certain things matter more to voters in different states. For instance, I just talked a lot about the Arab American community that has been a very big voting bloc for Democrats in a state like Michigan, and honestly, a state like Minnesota, which probably is the reason why you have Fox News rating it as such, especially following the uncommitted vote there. Looking at Georgia, however, I think issues like the border and national security matter more there. I think looking at this state individually as well, in the 2020 election, there wasn't much hope here that Biden was going to slam dunk it in the next election. Yes, Biden won it for the first time for any Democrat since 1992. And then it went on to vote for Democrats in the subsequent Senate elections in the January runoff of 2021 and the November and December elections of 2022. But that isn't to say that Georgia is inherently a blue state. When it came down to a race like Brian Kemp and Stacey Abrams, Georgia voted red by around 8 points. In direct contrast, a state like Arizona, which, similar to Georgia, had last voted for a Democrat with Bill Clinton in '96, voted for Joe Biden by a nearly identical margin in 2020. But Arizona voted for a Democratic governor, a Democratic senator, and nearly a Democratic House delegation after a very consequential victory there for Republicans that ended up still backfiring on them. And so looking at these two states and comparing them, I think while they may have similar issues that they worry about, the economy and the border, those are two important things in states like Georgia and Arizona. Arizona still seems to, at base value, lean a little bit more to the left than Georgia does, even if their 2020 margins seem to be identical. But when you look at races like the 2022 Senate races, Arizona went blue by 5 and Georgia went blue by 2. And honestly, Georgia had the worst Republican candidate when it compared to Blake Masters in the state of Arizona. And so I genuinely thought those margins might be more similar than they were different, but I can tell you that Arizona leans more blue than Georgia does. North Carolina, I'm not shocked by at all. I think North Carolina makes a lot of sense, and just looking at its electoral history, it's very hard for Democrats to even crack 50% there. They rarely do it, and when they do it, it happens in governor elections, and not on the Senate level, not on the House level, not on the presidential level. Barack Obama was the last one to do it in 2008, and that was just by 14,000 votes. He won Indiana, a state that Trump wins by 20 routinely, now a third time. North Carolina went blue by 14,000 votes. Indiana went blue by more. And so I really don't think North Carolina is in play for President Biden this time around. I think it'll be close. I think the margin reflects that, and that's why I think a lean characterization, makes sense when it comes down to my ratings. But North Carolina for right now, I'd say, I agree, is going red. If they're using percentages here, I'm not sure whether or not I agree with this distinction, but I'm going to take it at face value. And so North Carolina is red, Georgia is red, Florida, Texas, Iowa is red. we talked about the blue and red states. Wisconsin and Pennsylvania are swing states. Nevada and Arizona are swing states. And what I do appreciate a lot about this map is that I don't think it feeds into this narrative that President Trump is automatically going to win re-election. If I showed you these numbers 4 years ago today, I would have said that Donald Trump is on track for victory in the general election. In fact, the great thing about Real Clear Politics is that they do show you where the polls were 4 years ago today and 8 years ago today. They did this back in 2020. And it was tremendously helpful because it shows us that that Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden back in the past 2 elections were up by 5.5% for Biden, 4% for Hillary Clinton over Donald Trump. And today, Donald Trump leads by 1.8%. But now everything's different. Because although Joe Biden is losing the popular vote when it comes down to electoral math here, when it comes down to the general election polling, it doesn't necessarily mean he's automatically losing the Electoral College. For the first time, I genuinely believe that there is a possibility here that President Trump wins the popular vote but loses the presidential election. It would honestly be a perfect full circle moment for Democrats should that be the outcome. But I think it happens for a multitude of reasons, and Fox News recognizes that. Rather than leaning into this idea that a Trump +2 national advantage means automatically Trump winning over 350 electoral votes, like some have indicated, that is not the case. The 7-point swing we are expecting to see on the popular vote is not going to translate, seemingly, to a 7-point swing in the swing states. And I genuinely believe that. Because when we see Biden up by 0.8 in Pennsylvania, I think that number is roughly where we are. And I'm often reminded that in the 2022 midterms, despite the national vote being correct, that Republicans did win the popular vote by what the polls predicted. The statewide polls were all whack. And even with a 3-point national victory, Democrats won Pennsylvania by 5 in the Senate, 15 in the governor, won Michigan in the governor's race by 11, won Wisconsin by 3 points in the governor's race, won Georgia Senate race, won Arizona Senate race, won Nevada Senate race, won New Hampshire Senate race. They ran up the margins in these swing states, despite the national numbers being turned against them. You are talking an 11-point swing from the 2018 midterm elections in which Democrats, in fact, did worse in some states. It all comes down to these individual states, these individual battlegrounds where Democrats, quite frankly, are slated to do better than where they are on the national map, and I think Fox News recognizes that. And so where we are, I agree with a lot of these characterizations on this map. I think they genuinely provide good insight as to where the election stands today. And so with 46 toss-up electoral votes, Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, I couldn't agree more. When it comes down to some of these characterizations, though, I will say I'm not loving the one in Michigan. I'm not loving the one in Ohio being a little bit more red than the state of Iowa. But generally speaking, I think Fox News has gotten one of the closest to reality maps that we have seen in this election cycle. And so kudos to them, and looking at these power rankings, it's good news for President Biden, even if their takeaway is that Trump leads a dissatisfied electorate. Because with numbers like these on the national, in no reality should Biden have any chance, but it is clear here that he absolutely does and may end up the victor of this November presidential election. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.